Now, one of our choices for an ASP.NET application is Forms Authentication. Now, Forms Authentication uses cookies, and if you remember a few videos back, we talked about the strengths and weaknesses of cookies. So one of the things you're always going to balance with your authentication methods with ASP.NET is how much control do you have over your environment. Cookies can be turned off again at the client side. They can be destroyed. All kinds of things can happen. Now, it's not unusual anymore to see websites out there. Microsoft's website and a lot of places on there actually tells you that you can't use that website unless you have cookies enabled in your browser. So you may have to do something like that with yours. Basically, what's going to happen is when a user connects to the web application, it's going to check to see if they have ever been authenticated. If they have, there will be a cookie that was planted on their machine. And of course, every time the browser makes a request, it passes the cookie up when it makes a request to that domain. If that cookie's there and it indicates that they've been authenticated, then they just come on into the website. If that cookie is not there, then a login form is displayed to the user. And then information is authenticated. Now, we can write code for that, and there's all kinds of tweaks we can do, but we're not going to go into it. Now, once the login information is authenticated, then a cookie gets generated. The cookie is placed on that user's machine, and the user is redirected to their originally requested page in their end of the website. Now, Forms Authentication is popular. Subsequent accesses are going to look for the cookie and grant access without any other ID popping up. Now, people like that because their users are being authenticated, although they don't realize it, and they're not having to go through a login form every time, but we do know who they are. Now, when we start writing the code for this in the background, there is a Forms Authentication object in the .NET framework that we're going to be utilizing to make this happen. Now, to enable Forms Authentication, to turn this on and choose this particular style of authentication, what we're going to do is, first of all, configure IIS to use anonymous authentication, because we want IIS just to pipe these people right through and hand them to our code and let us take it from there. And you remember in the previous video, we looked at how to set anonymous authentication up in IIS. Now, to set the authentication, note, if you remember, we're going to go to the settings in the web config file, and notice in the authentication tab, and we looked at that just a few minutes ago when we were out there, we're going to set the authentication mode to forms. And this is a mistype here. I should have a couple of quotes over here. But we're going to set it to forms. And then our forms name, we're going to set a name suffix here. And this has to do with our cookie. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then our login URL. And this is where actually the login page happens. And so if the user doesn't have the cookie present, then they're going to be redirected to this file right here, and they're going to get the login page. Now, the name suffix is for the cookie, and we're telling it basically how to identify the cookie, and this is what it's going to look for each time when they come back. Now, to set up authorization, now this is authentication. This is, can they, who are they? Okay, authorization is where we're going to say, what can they do? And notice we've got allow users Mark, and we're allowing a user named Mark onto this web application. Now, Microsoft does not recommend doing this. Don't you love it when somebody shows you this and says, don't do it this way? What Microsoft recommends is setting up roles that's very similar to groups, and applying permissions or denying permissions to groups or roles. That makes it much easier to troubleshoot and to handle security. Then our next step would be to build a login form called Login ASPX. And that's the basic steps here. There's lots of information in third-party publications and in the documentation itself on the nuts and bolts behind this. But understand, this is how we set up Forms Authentication. And just as a review, the user is going to try to hit the website. If they've never been authenticated, they will be presented a login form. They can put in a name and a password. It will be verified in code. And if that person is legit, then they get a cookie placed on their machine and they're redirected to their original requested page. On subsequent visits, when they hit the website, their browser will pass the cookie up that was planted before. The web server will see that cookie, and the user will come on in. They have been authenticated by that cookie, but they may not realize it. That's Forms Authentication.